Okay, so good morning, everybody, and happy Hanukkah. Technically speaking, one does not say Chag Sameach for today. Chag Sameach is reserved for those holidays that are listed in the Torah as sacred occasions. The book of Leviticus and the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy list the holidays that are celebrated throughout the year and the special sacrifices that have to be brought on them. So for those, you say Chag Sameach. For Hanukkah, since Hanukkah is not even in the Bible, you technically say, just waiting for, there we go. You technically say Chag Urim Sameach. May you have a happy holiday of lights. All right, so it's in rabbinical school where nothing's wrong if you say Chag Sameach, but in rabbinical school where professors, at least in my day, professors try to put students in their place and make them feel like students all the time. If you said Chag Sameach, or if a professor overheard students saying to each other Chag Sameach, they'd immediately interrupt and say, you know nothing. It's supposed to be Chag Urim Sameach, not Chag Sameach. And then you feel like a fool for the rest of the day because the professor put you in your place like that. So sometimes I have memories of these not pleasant memories of rabbinical school when it comes to this. It's the same for Purim. You're not supposed to say Chag Sameach on Purim either. You say Chag Purim Sameach. Or you could say Simchat Purim, a joyous Purim. So Chag Sameach on Hanukkah is okay, but if you want to show off, you can say Chag Urim Sameach, a happy festival of lights. So that, which leads us into the history of Hanukkah and what the holiday of Hanukkah is all about. So, of course, we're all familiar with the story that we heard in religious school and that we pass down to our children and to our grandchildren. You know, that 2,100 years ago, and this is a historical fact, around the year 165 BCE, the Greek army or the Greek Empire ruled the land of Israel. The land of Israel at that time was an important crossroads between Egypt and Asia Minor and the rest of the Middle East. All caravan routes went through the land of Israel, and also sea trade routes went through Israel as well with the port of Jaffa. So it's an important trade route. And after Alexander the Great was assassinated, the generals that took over the empire, some ruled in Syria and some ruled in Egypt. And depending on who was in charge, either the Egyptian Greeks were in charge of the land of Israel, or the Syrian Greeks were in charge of the land of Israel. So at the time of Hanukkah, it was the Syrian Greeks who were in charge, and the general in charge was Antiochus, or Antiochus as it's pronounced in Hebrew. So Antiochus, it's Antiochus the Fourth, actually, decided to decree that public observance of Jewish rituals is forbidden, no Torah study, and legend had it that he forced Jews to eat pork in public. So some Jews revolted against the Greek Empire, and those were the Maccabees, led by the father, Mattathias, or Matityahu, or Matthew in English. The name Matthew is Matityahu in Hebrew. Matityahu was a Kohen, if not the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and his 5 sons, including Judah, led the band of Maccabees in revolt against the Greek Empire, and miraculously won. And not only did Antiochus issue these decrees against Jewish observance, he also brought idols into the temple in Jerusalem. So the Maccabees cleaned out the temple, besides defeating the Greek Empire, instituting the Hasmonean dynasty. So this family of Matityahu and his children were known as Hashmonaim in Hebrew, or Hasmoneans. And for the next 100 years or so, the land of Israel was autonomous for Jewish rule, led by Hasmonean kings, all descended from Judah Maccabee. So there's question as to how Jewish they were after all, but for those 100 years or so until the Romans came, there was Jewish autonomy in the land of Israel. So the Maccabean revolt against the Greek Empire is one thing we celebrate on the holiday of Hanukkah, and the fact that one small jar of pure olive oil was found in the temple in order to light the menorah. The menorah is not this 9-branched menorah, that's a Chanukiah, but in the temple was a 7-branched menorah that was to be lit every day and stay lit with pure olive oil. So that's why in lots of synagogue design, and also one of the most ancient Jewish symbols is the 7-branched menorah, right? So that's, and the symbol of the state of Israel, the official symbol of the state of Israel is a 7-branched menorah. You go to the Knesset, Israel's parliament today, right outside at the main security entrance to the Knesset is a huge sculpture of a 7-branched menorah. So that's what stood in the portable sanctuary in the Mishkan and later in the temple in Jerusalem. We have a 9-branched menorah called a Chanukiah, just special to celebrate Hanukkah. So that small jar of oil was only enough oil to last for 1 day, but miraculously it lasted for 8 days. And that's why we celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days. Okay, so that's the story we all know. These great heroes, the Maccabees, defeating the mighty Greek Empire, fight for religious freedom and the right for Jews to be Jewish in the land of Israel. Rah, rah, Maccabees, go, advocacy for religious rights, whatever. But the historical record, as Jules was alluding to before class started, is a little bit more nuanced than these fanciful stories that we tell and retell every year around Hanukkah and that we teach in religious school and in Jewish day school. So what were the Maccabees fighting for? And who were they fighting against? So I'll never forget a lecture I had when I was at Hebrew University for my junior year of college. So I spent the whole year at Hebrew University, and my Hebrew was good enough that I was able to study in Hebrew with world-renowned Jewish scholars. So I took what's known as ancient Judaism. Ancient Judaism is essentially the period post-biblical until the Talmudic times. So post-biblical, in the timeline of Jewish history, post-Bible, which would be around 400 BCE, until the time of the Talmud, which is 500 CE. So that 1,000-year period is technically known in the Jewish history world as ancient history, as opposed to biblical history. And so that's the course I took in Hebrew. And there was one course one class by Dr. Isaiah Gaffney about Maccabee itself. How do you spell Maccabee in Hebrew? That's a key to understanding some of this history. I'm not asking how to spell Maccabee in English. What counts is how to spell Maccabee in Hebrew, because we know in Hebrew there are two Hebrew letters that make that K sound. The letter Kuf with a dot in it makes the K sound, and the letter Kuf, the Kuf with the long tail, makes the K sound. So how are you supposed to spell Maccabee in Hebrew? So Maccabee can either be spelled with a Kuf or a Kuf. If it's spelled with a Kuf, Maccabee is, the root is Makav, Mem Kuf Bet, which is a hammer. So the name Maccabee could reflect the military might of this band of Jewish guerrilla fighters who were fighting against Greek tyranny. Or if you spell it with a Kuf, the letter Kuf, okay, now I'm going to spell it out here on a piece of paper and show you what I mean. I'm just, okay. Oh, so this is a thing. I got my background in front of me. And okay, let me turn off my virtual background so you can see the piece of paper. And I'll put that background back on. There we go. Okay, now you can see the paper. These are the two ways to spell Maccabee. Okay, so either the letter Kuf or the letter Kuf. If it has the letter Kuf, then it stands for Mem Kuf Bet, which means hammer. If it's spelled with a Kaf, then I have to do something else to the word. When you write an abbreviation in Hebrew, you don't use dots, you use the quotation marks. So if it's spelled with a Kaf, then Maccabee stands for 4 Hebrew words. Mi kamocha ba'elim Adonai. If it's spelled with a Kaf, then it stands for who is like you among all the gods, O God. Okay, it's taken from the book of Exodus, from the Song of the Sea, chapter 15 of Exodus, and we sing it before the Amidah at the Friday night service and at the Shabbat morning service. So you might know the tune, Mi kamocha ba'elim Adonai, Mi kamocha Nedar Kodesh. Okay, my singing isn't so great, but that's where it's from. It's in the prayer book, but it's from the Torah. So Maccabee, spelled with a Kaf, then stands for promoting monotheism. And that the Maccabees then are known as the Maccabees because they were standing for God and advocating for God and restoring Jewish worship to the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, so if they are spelled with the letter Kuf, then or the letter Kaf, who are they fighting against? Are they just fighting against the Greek army, or are they also fighting against Jews living in Israel who were trying to be like the Greeks? And that was a thing. Hellenism is the term for trying to be like the Greeks. Okay, so Hellenism or Hellenistic times, it's about Greece. So during the time that the Greeks were in Israel, there were people in Israel who were enamored with the Greek Empire, and they thought, and Greek culture, and they thought that if they acted like the Greeks, then they would be treated better, and there wouldn't be as much anti-Semitism, at least that they would encounter if they acted Greek. So, you know, it's interesting. The name Alexander is a Hebrew name. but it's obviously a Greek name. There are Jews today, or there were Jews, especially in the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud, who had the name Alexander. And that is considered, you can spell it out in Hebrew letters, and that was considered a Hebrew name. It's so common for Jews to have that Greek name that it was considered a Hebrew name. So it's, in other words, it's like you have Yiddish names, like I know, like a past president of Shul is Hai Grossberg. So his Hebrew name is Herzl Isaac. Well, Isaac's an English name, but in Yiddish, it's Isaac. So Herzl Isaac, it's common to do that. And so you have names that enter into Hebrew or Yiddish that come from German, Polish, or other origins, and are so common within Jewish culture that they're considered Hebrew names too, like Dov Bear. So Bear is Yiddish for bear, and Dov is Hebrew for bear. So it's, or Naphtali Hertz. Hertz is Yiddish for deer, D-E-E-R, the animal. And Naphtali, the son of Jacob, one of the tribes of Israel, the symbol for the tribe of Naphtali is a deer. So that's why it's common, Naphtali Hertz, to have a name like that. Anyway, I digress. So the name, so Jews in the Greek Empire, influenced by Greek culture, would not only take on Greek names, but they would act Greek. They would go to the amphitheaters that were built in the land of Israel. They would go to the bathhouses. They would speak Greek. And in fact, part of the culture of Greece is the gymnasium, which people went to, and it was expected, it was only men who could go to the gymnasium, and they went naked. So a Jewish man naked, you can tell the difference if they're Jewish or not. And there would be Jews, this is recorded in history, there would be Jews in that time period, 2100 years ago, who would undergo the operation to reattach a foreskin so that they would be able to participate fully in the gymnasium and look like every other Greek man. So the Maccabees, are they fighting against the Greek army alone, or are they fighting against Jews who were acting like Greeks? So according to the record, the historical record, the Maccabees were also fighting a Jewish civil war and promoting this return to Jewish values. Do away with the Greek values, stand for Jewish values only. So that's why traditionally it is expected to spell Maccabee, I'm sorry here that this is doing this, with the bet and not the kuf, because the traditional Jewish religious way to spell it is with the letter bet. So now all the teams, right, it's common for sports teams to be known as Maccabee teams. So in Europe, before the establishment of the State of Israel, throughout Western Europe, there were Jewish sports societies known as Maccabi groups, and that was spelled with the letter Kaf. There are teams in Israel like Maccabi Tel Aviv is a great basketball team, periodically making it to the European Basketball Championships. That Maccabi team, so there's Maccabi Tel Aviv, there's Maccabi Haifa, many cities around Israel, the Jewish professional sports teams, a lot of them are Maccabi teams, and they're all spelled with the letter Kaf, not the letter Kuf. So that's the traditional. Even nobody knows the history behind it. It's spelled with the letter Kaf. But in history, if you're taking history lessons, then there's the question, how really is it supposed to be spelled, with the Kaf or the Kuf? And nobody today, outside of those who have been who have taken a class know what Maccabi stands for. They just know that it's traditional to have a sports team be a Maccabi team. So a lot of the people who support Maccabi Tel Aviv or Maccabi Haifa in soccer in Israel today have no idea why the Maccabi is spelled that way. I'm sure they just know that that's their club and that's who they're rooting for, and that's what's important to them. So the historical record for Hanukkah is based on books known as the books of the Maccabees. So in the Jewish Bible, the book of Maccabees is not in the Jewish Bible. It might be in the Christian Bible, but it's in a section known as apocryphal literature. That is literature from the time of the Bible that didn't make it into the Bible. So there are 4 books of the Maccabees, some 1 or 2 written in Hebrew, the others written in Greek, that talk about the time period and life of Jews at the time. Are they historically accurate? It's unclear. There's the book of Josephus. Josephus was a Jew who was also a historian, but his historical methods aren't exactly up to snuff. But he's from the time of near the destruction of the second temple around the year 70 and before. So he has some history of the Hasmonean period. And there's some other Greek historical records too that talk a little bit about what happened at this time. So that we do know that Antiochus was a historical figure. We do know that Judah Maccabee was a historical figure. We do know that Matityahu, the priest, Judah's father, was a historical figure. What exactly happened? We're not sure. Did the miracle of the oil really happen? We're not sure. The struggle, the fight of the Jews against the Greeks, that did happen. Was it such a miracle? That's also unclear. But the backstory is that not all Jews were against the Greek Empire and against Greek culture, and the Maccabees weren't just fighting the Greeks themselves; they were fighting other Jews. It became a popular holiday. Feel free to interrupt at any time with a question or a comment, but it became a popular holiday so that by the time of the Talmud, so that the Talmud is edited from material from 200 CE to 500 CE, over a 300-year period. So the holiday of Hanukkah is not in the Mishnah, which is from 100 BCE to 200 CE. It is in the Talmud. So there isn't a separate section on Hanukkah in the Talmud. In the tractate dealing with Shabbat, which deals with about candles, what material can be used as candle material to light Shabbos candle, in that lengthy chapter is a section on Hanukkah, which begins my Hanukkah, which is Aramaic for what is Hanukkah. So the rabbis of the Talmud explain why we celebrate Hanukkah, both the struggle of the Maccabees against the Greeks and also the miracle of the oil. So that's in the Talmud. And then it tells us how we are supposed to celebrate Hanukkah. What are the mitzvahs associated with the holiday of Hanukkah? So now we have just a step back for a second. Everything we do in Judaism today stems from the Torah, except for Purim and Hanukkah. Purim is not in the Torah. Hanukkah is not in the Torah. So the rabbis, there's no way the rabbis can trace the origin of the holiday back to the Torah, but they can trace some ways in which we celebrate those holidays to the Torah itself. So I talked about this on Purim months ago about Hanukkah. So today in synagogue at our morning service, we read Torah for Hanukkah. So how can you read Torah on Hanukkah when there's nothing in the Torah about Hanukkah? what are you supposed to read on Torah about Hanukkah? So if Hanukkah is about the rededication of the temple in Jerusalem, clearing out the idols and rededicating it to Jewish worship, then you can read a section in the Torah about the dedication of the first sanctuary, the Mishkan itself. So in the book of Numbers, chapter 7 is a lengthy chapter describing how each of the tribes brought a special gift to as part of the dedication ceremony of the tabernacle. They brought each tribe brought the exact same gift every single day. So each day of Hanukkah, you're reading about the gifts that were brought that day of Hanukkah by the particular tribe. So in order to have enough verses to read, you read that day's offering plus the next day's offering as part of the reading, except for the 8th day of Hanukkah, which you'd read then the gifts from 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th days, because of the 12 tribes, but only 8 days. So that's what you read from the Torah. So the rabbis say you read Torah on Hanukkah. That's one of the mitzvahs associated with Hanukkah. You're supposed to light the candles like they are lit behind me. So in that particular Chanukiah, the shamash, the candle you use to light the other candles, is in the middle. And you always go from left to right. So the first candle on Hanukkah is on the right-hand side. Tonight, for the second night, you'd have the candle next to it to its left, and you light the leftmost candle first, going from left to right. And you'd light it as people outside would be seeing it, looking into your house. So let me say this, that the mitzvahs associated with lighting the candles are that they should be all on the same row. All the candles should be on the same level, and the shamash should be slightly higher or lower than the other candles, so that there's a difference, so that you can see on the picture behind me that the shamash is a little bit higher than the other candle. So a halachically correct menorah has all the candles on the same level and the shamash set apart. Okay. Now there are other artistic sculpture menorahs around, and I'm not saying you can't use them. I'm just saying, according to halacha, the tradition is to have them all in one row. Okay. And the candles are supposed to be lit in a window of your home so that passersby can see the candles, because the mitzvah is to publicize the pirsuma denisa. It's Aramaic for publicizing the miracle. So we need to be happy about this miracle of the oil and the miracle of the Maccabees defeating the mighty Greek army. And we're so happy that we're publicizing it. We're pronouncing the miracle in the windows of our home. So we're supposed to light them at a time when a lot of people would be driving by or walking by. So that's around the time of sunset to dark in ancient times, when you can't work in the dark. So people would be coming home from the fields or from their businesses. So between the time of sunset and nightfall would be the time to light the candles. And the candles are supposed to stay lit for at least an hour. So those are the mitzvahs associated with Hanukkah. Candles should be placed in the window. You're supposed to light the candles each night of Hanukkah, and be done in a way that people passing by can see it. There are also prayers added to the service. There's a prayer known as Al Hanisim, for the miracles, thanking God for the miracle, in which the prayer describes the miracle of the Maccabees and the jar of oil. So that's a lengthy paragraph that's added to the end of the Amidah. It's also added to the grace after meals. So during each day of Hanukkah, each service on Hanukkah, and every time we eat a full meal, we're supposed to say this Al Hanisim prayer. And when we light the candles, obviously 3 prayers the first night, including Shehechianu, 2 prayers the other nights. We also say an Al Hanisim, no, Al Hanerot. We say a paragraph for these candles, pointing out that the light of the candle is not supposed to be used for anything other than publicizing the miracle. Shabbos candles can be used to read a book by, to light up the room. You can use the light of the Shabbos candles, but you cannot use the light of the Hanukkah candles for any other purpose other than publicizing the miracle of Hanukkah. Okay, so those are, yes, Steve.
So I'm aware that you said that the candle holder should all be at the same level, the 8 candles.
Right.
My question is, do they have to be in the same plane?
Well, they all have to be on the same level. So when looking at them, yeah, they're all at the same height. So I'm not sure what you mean by the same plane.
I've seen Hanukkahs that are like kind of have a,
so
look down.
Yeah, so to be halachically correct, those Hanukkahot that take liberties with how the candles are distributed, that's not technically halachically correct menorah.
Right.
So to me, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. You're lighting the candles. But if you're in an Orthodox Jewish home, you would never see a menorah like that. You'd see a menorah like the one behind me, which has all the candles on the same level and the shamash on a different level. Just to point out, a shout out to Steve and his wife Margie. They have a menorah that they light on their front yard, and I know this because they live next door to me. So every year they have this. They have their step ladder, a taller ladder with a 2x4 stretched across it with these jars of sand in which they put candles. And so they light their Hanukkah menorah outside, really taking advantage of that mitzvah of publicizing the miracle. So kudos to the Isaacs for having that kind of menorah to really take the mitzvah full force and lighting those candles outside. In Israel, if we were in Israel now on Hanukkah, in certain neighborhoods, people actually build a niche into like their fence, their stone wall of their courtyard. They'd have a niche there, which would be like a glass enclosed box, in which they'd have their Hanukkah, their Hanukkah menorah. They would place it there. So certain neighborhoods in Jerusalem and other places around Israel, people have their homes built in such a way that they have these glass Hanukkah boxes, so that people walking by can see the menorah. Unlike Chabad rabbis who arrange for these huge Hanukkah candles, Hanukkah menorahs to be lit like it was last night on the ellipse outside the White House. And I think in Olney, where we are in one of the shopping centers, the Chabad will do a menorah lighting at least one of the nights of Hanukkah. So the Chabad house in Olney on the southbound side of Georgia Avenue has an electric menorah outside. So yeah, people get into, and the fire station in Olney on the northbound side of Georgia Avenue coming up from the shul has a blow-up Santa Claus or reindeer and a blow-up Hanukkah menorah as well. So people get into the decorations and making it into Christmas-like decorations. And, okay, that's not really, and I remember a long time ago on Saturday Night Live, a routine of Hanukkah Harry coming to visit the Jewish homes to make the Jewish kids feel better when Hanukkah fell on Christmas, so that we're not missing out on something. So, to the commercialization of Hanukkah, okay, obviously that's not what it's all about. And playing dreidel and having the Hanukkah gelt, that's fun for the kids. But really, what Hanukkah is all about is the menorah behind me, and thinking about the fight for religious freedom. So that's Hanukkah. Of course, you can argue the same thing about Christmas. People, that people say that some people are leaving the Christ out of Christmas, right? So when there's commercialization of that major Christian holiday, there are those who are upset about how people are forgetting the religious significance of the holiday. So yeah, and Hanukkah, of course, is a minor holiday, and because the major holidays are those that are written about in the Torah and described in the Torah as to be celebrated with special sacrifices. Those would be days off from work, that where the first day and last day is like Shabbat. Hanukkah is not like that. So it's you can go to work on Hanukkah. It's a full day. The only thing that reflects the idea that it's a holiday is that you read Torah every day of Hanukkah, and there are certain prayers, like you don't say the El Male, the memorial prayer. So you can have a funeral during Hanukkah, but there are certain prayers that would be adjusted to reflect the idea that it's Hanukkah. Joe, do you have a question? Because you're unmuted.
Well, two things.
Yeah.
What is that phrase in Aramaic again? Pirsuma.
Pirsuma denisa. That's in Hebrew, that would be lefarsem hanes, to publicize the miracle.
Right. Okay, I got a question.
Yes.
Is it true that all the other countries and people of ancient times during that time basically did assimilate to Hellenism, and their own cultures kind of disappeared to a degree, like Egyptian culture and Syrian culture and Phoenician, etc. And that's what made the Jews different, because they kept their identity through the Maccabees. And is there another thought? I think I read this somewhere, that if it had not been for that saving of Judaism from Hellenism, that Christianity would never have happened, and there wouldn't have been a Jesus. That because Judaism was preserved, Christianity could come out of Judaism. And
So yeah. So so I'm not up on all the history itself, but I am not sure, as Alexander conquered territory to make the Greek Empire what it was in the 300s BCE, whether he forced those people that he conquered to become Greek. I am not sure. I think that there were subsequent leaders of the Greek Empire who wanted everyone to be Greek and wanted to eradicate any other minority culture that wanted to maintain its own identity. So I'm not sure it was always a constant Greek Empire theme, or it was a sometime in some place Greek Empire theme. And I say that because Antiochus's decrees against the Jewish observance and Jewish practice, were they a one-time thing? Was it a new thing for his time? Or did he just enforce it more than anybody else enforced it? So I'm not sure. You'd have to check the historical records for that. So certainly what happened, what prompted the Maccabees to revolt, is that they felt threatened that perhaps their Jewish identity would be lost. Right? It's one thing to live under a Greek Empire where, the Greeks turn their backs and don't mind if Jews are praying or using a temple in Jerusalem. It's quite another thing if the Greeks are actually trying to take over the temple in Jerusalem and care about how individual Jews are acting. So that's what happened in the time of Antiochus, and that's why the Maccabees revolted. Can we say that Judaism survived thanks to the Maccabees? Yes, I think we can say that, and that the rabbis are kind of, because the rabbis at the time of the destruction of the temple, which was over 200 years after the time of Hanukkah, the rabbis maintained what the Maccabees started and developed a whole system, which is Judaism today. So what the Maccabees did, they did not develop Judaism as we know it. What the Maccabees did was return the sacrificial system to the temple in Jerusalem. There was no such thing as Judaism yet. Prayers as we know them, lighting Shabbos candles to observe Shabbat, the whole system of Jewish law, the 613 commandments, wasn't developed by the Maccabees. That was developed by the rabbis. And it's Jesus responded to that, not to the Maccabees. But I guess you could say, thanks to the Maccabees revolting against the Greeks and restoring worship to the temple in Jerusalem, that it allowed Judaism to survive for another 200 years so that the rabbis could develop their system, which becomes the Jewish system that we know today, and a society in which a Jesus could stem from, and his followers could establish Christianity. So I just tweaked what you said, Joe, to just a little bit, to put it in a little bit of historical context. Yeah.
Another associate, among the prohibitions that Antiochus laid down, did he want the Jews not to celebrate Shabbat?
That might have been part of it too. That's right. Because Shabbat, taking a day off, it also distinguishes yourself from the Greeks around you. And anything that would enhance distinction would be something that Antiochus would have forbidden.
Well, that expands the implications, because if the Jews invented the Sabbath day, and it first appears in Exodus, and
first appears technically in Genesis when God rested on the seventh day.
Genesis,
yes.
Sorry. And the Maccabees protected the Sabbath. That means the Maccabees saved the weekend for all mankind.
That's right. Go Maccabees. That's right. That's right. Yes, Lori, unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm really interested to know if there's any more information about how it played out as a civil war between the Jews, and how many Jews actually sided with the Greeks, and
right.
You know, all of that. And when the Maccabees, were they a minority, you know, of Jews?
Right. So these are good questions, Lori, and I don't have the answer to those questions. What you can look up is on Wikipedia. If you look up the article on Hanukkah on Wikipedia, and I don't know if they spell it CH or just H, just look that up, and that'll be a good entree into references there in that article about more information about who the Maccabees were and what historical sources were. There is historical information out there. It depends on how much you want to read and how much into it you want to get. There's Josephus and his this history of the Jews. So if you just look that up, also Google Josephus History of the Jews, you can see his account and his description of the holiday of Hanukkah. There's a midrash that's associated with Hanukkah, which is about Hannah and her 7 sons. So there's a story there that she to highlight how to bow down to an idol or give your son over to be killed. and Hannah gave each of her sons over to be killed instead of worshiping the idols. So that story, that legend, is associated with Hanukkah also. There's also an idea of eating dairy on Hanukkah because of Judith. There's a story of Judith and Holofernes, the Greek general, who she seduced and got him to go to sleep by serving him dairy, drinking warm milk, I guess, and other dairy products. So when he fell asleep in her tent, she assassinated him, cut off his head, and became a hero. So the book of Judith is another one of these apocryphal books with this legend associated with Hanukkah. So some people eat dairy on Hanukkah to remember that midrash too. Of course, eating fried foods on Hanukkah is to remember the oil lasting for 8 days. Yeah. So for the more history of that time, just Google it, and that'll start you on a journey of however much you want to read about it.
Thank you.
Yep. Steve.
Have you ever heard of this? And I'm sure it's a myth or truth, but women are not supposed to work while the candles are burning.
So I'm not sure it's just women. It should be everybody. It's a time where you're supposed to take in the light of the candles and allow it to spiritually move you, to remember why we're lighting the candles, the history of the holiday, the miracle, our relationship to God, etc. And if Maccabee is spelled with a kaf, then we're thinking Mi chamocha ba'ilim Adonai. So we're thinking about that relationship to God. So it's a time, it's like the Shabbos candles itself. How much time do you spend in front of the Shabbos candles? Like my wife spends a while after she lights the candles with her eyes covered, reciting a special private prayer before she takes her hands away from her eyes. So what private prayers are we reciting when we light Shabbos candles? How long are we spending around it with our family? Right, they're supposed to stay lit while we eat Shabbos dinner by the light of the Shabbos candles. So are we eating Hanukkah meal by the light of the candle? Are we playing dreidel, doing those things? So it's not just I didn't hear it as just a women's thing. I think it's for everybody to spiritually enjoy the light of the candles.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other thoughts or comments about Hanukkah? Okay, then. So I hope everybody enjoys the holiday and make it as spiritual as possible, but also enjoy whatever other shtick you got going with your family and friends. And we'll have an outdoor menorah lighting with a big electric menorah that we have Thursday evening at 5:30. Come to the shul. We'll be outside, dress warmly, and there'll be some refreshments served as well as we light that menorah. And then Sunday, the 7th day of Hanukkah, at 11:30 in the morning, we have a Hanukkah sing-along. Religious school families, everyone's welcome to come at 11:30 Sunday morning. So Chag Urim Sameach. Enjoy the Hanukkah holiday, everybody.
Bye.